Okay, so next up is Brian Beal. Brian doesn't know this, but when I got the idea for the science festival, when I was trying to figure out if it was a good idea or not, I found out about the Down East Institute, and I was like, I want to come visit. And he had no idea who I was. He was like, come out, and I go out there and I see this really cool little place with the prettiest algae I'd ever seen in my life, which is not a statement I ever thought I would say about anything. And he and I had this really great conversation, and I came out of that was probably 2013 or something like that, and I was like, well, we have to do this now so people know about Brian's work. So you were actually a much larger inspiration for the festival than you ever knew before. Isn't this great that I finally tell you about this now?
Jeez.
Okay, so Brian is a professor of marine ecology and the director of the Marine Science Field Station at the Down East Institute at the University of Maine at Machias. He grew up in Jonesport and began working for the University of Maine Cooperative Extension in 1984. This foray up, he did a bunch of work with. I have to compress your bio. Sorry. His 4-H project eventually evolved into the Beals Island Regional Shellfish Hatchery and eventually the Down East Institute in 2000. In 1986, he helped establish the first ever lobster hatchery in Maine that was run and operated by fishermen. A year later, he worked to create the regional shellfish hatchery in the town of Beals that is known today as the Down East Institute for Applied Marine Research and Education. In 2000, he became a Fulbright Scholar and worked on the west coast of Ireland at the National University in Galway. And recently, he helped the board of directors at the Down East Institute create the easternmost marine research laboratory and education center in the United States in the town of Beals. In May of 2025, Brian will be entering his 40th year as a member of the University of Maine and Machias community, which is not so bad. His favorite science theme item, he's got two: A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking and The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks.
Okay. Well, my name is Brian Beal, and I've worked at my alma mater, as Kate said, for the University of Maine at Machias for 40 years. And I have a split appointment between teaching courses in marine biology and statistics and conducting research that's focused mainly on my passion, which is soft-shell clams, which, of course, are not coming up here. There we go. Soft-shell clams, Maya arenaria. My passion stems from my grandfather, Milton Beal, a fifth-generation Jonesporter, who taught me how to make lobster traps and how to fish them, as well as how to find and harvest soft-shell clams. Clamming was one way I earned my money to go to UMM as a student, and it was dependable, especially during the 1970s when there were about 3,500 licensed clammers in Maine. Clamming is hard work, and I've got a great deep respect and passion actually for clammers, especially given the challenges that they face today. Well, Kate, I guess we're just going to have to go with it. Yeah. There's supposed to be some red bars here. But anyway, since 1977, catches for soft-shell clams have declined by about 85%. The blue dots that you see there are actually the value of the fishery in $20-25, and the value has gone down since 1977 by about 70%. There's a bunch of lines here that are supposed to come in. We found historic landings, low landings in 1959, but within the last 8 years, there's been 3 historic low landings for soft-shell clams. Meanwhile, the number of clammers has dropped by nearly 2,500 in the mid-70s. So to address the declining clam fishery, I helped establish the Beals Island Regional Shellfish Hatchery in 1987. This was Maine's first public shellfish hatchery, and it initially produced soft-shell clam seed for stock enhancement purposes for 6 towns between Addison and Machias Port. And by the fall of 1987, we'd produced nearly 10 million clams, cultured clams, the largest of which were planted on two flats in each of 6 communities. In subsequent years, juvenile clams from the regional hatchery were planted in over 60 towns up and down the coast. In 1994, a group of local citizens began overseeing the stock enhancement program, and by 1999, the nonprofit that they had established sought to expand facilities to create the easternmost marine research lab and education center and research and development shellfish hatchery in the U.S. This was the Down East Institute. And while that took approximately 18 years and a change of venue still in the town of Beals, A piece of that ray of hope for the soft-shell clam fishery became time for people to begin working on statewide clamming problem. So between 2010 and 2020, most results from field experiments that I conducted with my students and with clammers boiled down to the same thing, whether we were working in Jonesport or Trenton, Brunswick, or Freeport, and that was predation, mostly on the recently settled soft-shell clams. And whether the predator was a moon snail or a milky ribbon worm or a wry-mouthed fish, we found nothing compares to the devastation on clam populations that's caused by the invasive green crab. Well, clams have a two-phase life cycle starting in the plankton, and to study their settlement and early survival, we created a statewide clam recruitment monitoring network, a clam recruitment monitoring network in 2020 involving towns in the west of Wells and to the east in Sabayak. We invented a passive collector, a 1 foot by 2 foot by 3 inch deep wooden box with a fine mesh on top and an agricultural ground cloth on the bottom to quantify clam numbers settling to the relatively predator-free spaces. And since 2020, we've expanded that monitoring network to involve 12 communities. These collectors are deployed at 2 flats in each of the 12 communities in the spring before clams spawn, and we leave them until mid-November, well after clam spawning. When we remove the collectors from the flats, we also take core samples and look at the number of recently settled clams in those 24 flats. And what we found is that the collectors contain dozens to hundreds of clams as well as other bivalve species. Our recent research shows that larger clams produce exponentially more eggs or sperm, just like lobsters and sea urchins. And so now we're working with clammers, town officials, the Maine State Department of Marine Resources, and the legislature to propose a maximum size limit for Oh boy, that didn't come out at all. I guess it's an Apple and PC thing. Anyway, we're hoping to reverse the trend by establishing a maximum size limit for soft-shell clams. And thank you very much. Wow. I guess I got to become an Apple friend.
Sorry.
Nope.
I'm never going back to the PC. Go ahead.
I noticed the Maine shoreline got pretty beat up this winter and last winter. Does it affect the clams, or are they underneath the soil enough to survive that? And also, what is the size we should stop at?
Yes, great question. So yes, those storms did have some effect. They put an awful lot more mud in places where the clams were, but fortunately they're filter feeders and they can handle that for the most part. And your second question was about maximum size. Yeah, so I went out and took a look at the commercial catch, and we sampled 9 bushel of clams each on each of the largest or the spring tides of the year at a station, a clam buying station in Beal's Island and one in Topsom. And what we would do is we would take 1 bushel at a time, dump it onto a table, mix everything up, and then take 25 clams at random and just simply measure them. And so that gave us a size frequency distribution. We measured about 3,600 clams in Beals, and we measured about 1,500 clams in Topsom. And what we found is that at 3.5 inches and above, we had 5% of the catch occurring in Beals, and in Topsom down in southern Maine, we had 3%. So in talking to the buyers that we went into their shops, they don't want to buy big clams, and they only do to keep the clammers coming in and happy. So if there were a restriction on the large clams, they'd love it. They lose money on the large clams. So that's what that would be, a 3.5 inch maximum. And what we would do is ask the legislature to put a sunset clause on that, so the recruitment boxes would tell us fairly soon whether or not we were getting more settlement or whether or not it made any difference at all. Certainly we would want the commercial catch to increase, but again, those boxes would tell us almost immediately. So a 5-year limit on that, and that study would go hand in hand to see whether or not it would work or not. I mean, it's really a hypothesis.
I have 2 questions. One, how do we get your grandmother's recipe for biscuits and veg chowder, because that looks delicious? But more importantly, I'm hoping you can expand a little bit on the relationship between the green crabs and the clams, particularly not the relationship, I guess, but what's being done to combat the invasive species of the green crab, because I know that there's a lot of lasting impact on eelgrass and everything else off the coast.
The problem with green crabs is that they respond to temperature, and um, Damien's 2008 date, something happened with green crabs. They exploded, and they really haven't stopped. We're kind of hoping that all the ice that we saw this year is something that will put them back. People want to know, well, who eats green crabs or what eats green crabs? It turns out that everything that's out there, whether it's a duck or fish, another crab species, everything eats green crabs, but they're so damn fecund that they absolutely explode. So we're talking about trillions of ovigerous females out there that are producing, for a 2-inch green crab, that produce about 165,000 eggs each. So there's only really one thing that's going to stem the tide of green crabs, even though, yes, we can eat them, yes, we can trap them, but the numbers aren't there. If you wanted to trap out the green crabs, the fishery would have to be larger than the lobster industry right now. So the only thing that's going to save us for right now is cold weather. Yeah, and who knows when that's ever going to come. So that's why we need to allow more clams to spawn, so that we can try to swamp out the effects of green crab predators. And so that's what we'd like to test. Thank you.
I think we're good. Thank you.